All right, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Regional School District Board of Education Special Work Session to order, August 29th, 2023 at 5:09 p.m. We stand for the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. All right, number 2, approval of an agenda.
So moved.
Moved by John. And second by Lucy. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, number 3, joint work session with our building committee. And I'd like to welcome back Rusty and Carson from QA&M. I believe they're going to start off with a presentation and then we will get into the discussion after that.
So rather than, what I'm going to do is just touch on some points so that, as we're having the discussion and we're making a decision on what options to move forward with, there's a bigger picture and understanding of some of the criteria that we really see for that.
Always try to go this far. Want my copy?
Made big time.
I did. And we made a couple. Let me see if I can hear. I don't have my glasses.
You can share it.
There was permanent. Ready, I don't mind. You know what? I can get mine out too. I can get another one. Does everyone want a larger copy?
You should say that. I'll share it with you.
I just did check online. Maura, you there?
I can hear you guys now.
Okay. Linda,
Yep.
Amanda,
Yes.
Mariah,
I can hear you. Thank you.
Nick.
So a few things. Didn't want to get back into enrollment because I think everybody has a pretty good understanding of enrollment. But what I wanted to reiterate on the state reimbursement side, when we were looking at these projects, one of the things that we were really evaluating is what gives us the maximum reimbursement on a project. So within any project, you can do, all those different options. You can pick and choose what you want to do, including one which is an addition or an alterations project, which is sort of a limited scope project. There's a renovation or renovator's new scope and project as well. So the challenge is in determining what's the best approach is if you're going to do major infrastructure work on a project, you're better off than taking it on as a renovator's new, at least starting there, because what you'll get is reimbursement for all everything that you're going to touch. If you do, I mean, you might be able to do a sort of alterations and renovations project. Then it's pick and choose what you're going to get reimbursed for. So in my experience, most of the time when you go down that path, the cost may be lower in terms of the upfront cost. Let's say, it might be 25 million on a project, but the net costs, which are when you factor in the reimbursements, are actually going to be higher than a cost for a renovator's new project. So you have to be careful. If you really want to maximize, and what you really want to look at is the net cost to the region, not the gross cost to the region, because when you look at the gross project cost minus the reimbursement, that's the final number. So you can approach every project in multiple ways and pick and choose where you want to go. In some cases, you may not address all the items that you should address in the renovation of the schools, such as educational needs, etc., and just focus on code. And you'll notice that in some of our budgets, we say code and ADA update only. So if the school had very little, we weren't really changing anything, but what we try to do is at least address code-related items and ADA-related items. And the reason we did that is because those are eligible for reimbursement. So if you're trying to upgrade your schools, that's one of the things to do. In those scenarios, we're not renovating the entire buildings. We're not upgrading the science labs if that was, let's say, the need, or doing other educational improvements. It's mainly the code and ADA update. Now, in some cases, that might involve some infrastructure work, which sort of blends into capital improvement work that needs to be done. But that would need to be, what we're going to do is at the next stage, the next step, which we are shortlisting down to a few projects, that's when we'll do a critical analysis of that level of detail of how, what code work needs to be done and potentially what capital needs needs to be done as well. So that's one of the things that I just wanted to point out before we get into the overall discussion. We're going to talk about grade configuration as well, but the other thing I did want to mention, and the question that had been raised as well, is we've taken on this, when we say repurpose a school, we really haven't defined what that means. I mean, that could mean demolition of the building, and that could mean the sale of the building and the property. And it could mean repurposed it for another community function. But as a regional district, you're limited to the educational component of it. So you would have to decide what are your options really when it comes to not using a particular school. Could you? I don't think it would make any sense to demolish the building, because then you still own the property. But maybe that's one of the things that I think needs to be resolved or discussed today, so that when we factor in the numbers and in terms of the budget, we address that specifically. Just for clarification, we put some numbers together, but we really put it together for a demolition project, saying we would address hazmat issues, we demolish, but that's only to be able to get some kind of an idea. It's not that that's the decision. It's just so that we had some idea that there's cost associated with each of these buildings. For instance, if you leave them alone and don't use them, you still have ongoing expenses to maintain the building because you don't want it to deteriorate as time goes on. So that's something that we would need some direction on tonight in terms of, what your thinking is on, with regard to that. We did use and provide information from a capital needs estimate that was provided to us. We haven't looked at it critically. We will look at it critically when we go down to the short list of projects. But it gives a pretty good idea of what the cost would be. And it really is the base sort of case of do nothing other than improve your buildings as the need arises. And you see that that's not a small number. I mean, that's, I think, the 25 million plus range. And what you also will see that very little of that is eligible for reimbursement. So you would do it over time. You'd have to fit it in, and there's a lot of escalation that would have to be factored in. And at the end of the day, you get very little reimbursement for that work. So that's just something that we're using and we've identified in the cost data sheet to be provided. And finally, we did look at the report in terms of what happens if you close down one school or two schools. And we took the information on operations cost savings, and we just, there was a 1 year, a 10-year, 15-year, and a 20-year number in there. We just used the 10-year number. That could be whatever you choose it to be. If you say, typically, if we did a major project, we would bond it over 20 years. Maybe we need to use a 20-year number because you're trying to establish the savings over 20 years. I've shown a number that's just really for the first 10 years, as was presented by Ed Aram earlier on. So those are the items that I wanted to just bring up before we got into a discussion on what the options on what makes the best sense. As I look at the overall numbers, as indicated, there's operational costs, especially if you pick an option where one or two schools are closed. And in the operational cost savings, the type of project you select may require an addition at another school to accommodate more students, and you would bring two schools offline. So that operational cost is going to be a plus and a minus in terms of you're adding some square footage, but then you're taking square footage off. The other thing that you have to consider is when you renovate a building, you're going to bring it to an energy efficiency level that the ones that you currently have are not achieving. They're actually pretty inefficient when it comes to the use of energy. And that's a major factor in your ongoing operational costs. So even though one particular building may grow, the cost associated with maintaining that building will come down because you're updating all the systems in there, and you're not going to be replacing long-term items like boilers and HVAC systems. All those things will be in a 15 to 20-year window before they will need to be replaced. So that's just something to consider. So ultimately, it's a matter of, when I look at all the numbers, they're not that much different. There are a few outliers in terms of the project cost. But when you consider, what I look at is what's the net cost to the district. And that's one number. And then I put right next to it the capital project savings and also the operational cost reduction. I mean, when I say capital project savings, in other words, the work that you would have expended on capital projects would not need to be done if you renovate those particular buildings. So that's just an overview for what I have to say, and just wanted to have you guys discuss what options you'd like in terms of the great configuration.
And the capital needs of the 25 million. That's our estimate over a long time period, and when they may be needed. And so you don't anticipate, I can't tell really, have you included any of those capital needs in the project growth?
So
Not in the, for example, if you look at the first option. Just for an example, where there's $4.5 million at Lyman, but the cost estimate is 12.1. Does that include the $4.5 million or not?
So what I was trying to highlight there, and maybe I should explain this, is we have in red is the project cost. So if we were to do an update of the project in this particular scenario, converting Lyman to a 2 through 5 school, we would need to bring in this particular case, we're talking about completely renovating the building. So it's all the systems are up to date. It's a educationally sound place.
So the capital needs will go away.
The capital needs go away, exactly. So it's just to show that you would have spent $4.5 million, but the net cost of $8.3 million is what you would be comparing this. Instead of spending $4.5 just to do your basic capital needs, you will be taking care of all that for the 8.3.
And if the life cycle cost of some of those capital needs is around the first year of a 20-year life, would you still redo it? Or you would have to make a decision. Let's say we just put in a new boiler for $2 million. Today, you would not go out and bond another $2 million to replace that boiler. You would wait.
What you would want to do is evaluate the building and say, what systems can you
Yes.
keep?
But
So-
your cost up above includes the capital needs down below.
Right.
So if we did nothing, it's over a time period, there would be $25 million based on our current capital needs, but it's not all 1 year.
That's correct.
It could be over many years when we hit those
I
25.
thought it was over a 5-year window.
It's not that many years.
Yeah. So
Everything's
it's,
due now.
5 years is what it's over. So that's not a long time.
Yes.
That's good.
So,
So you're not looking at 20 years for those capital improvements. You're looking at 5 worst case, 10 best case, depending on the life of them.
And let me also mention that in those capital needs, that's just maintaining what you already have.
no,
That's not improving, like, for instance, the air quality issues. That's not saying you're going to put in new systems. That's purely saying, oh, I've got a boiler or a pump, whatever that's failing, we're just going to replace it. You're not replacing any infrastructure. You're not adding and making the building any safer. You know, you're doing just the basic things that you need to maintain the building.
and is all of that. If every project, once we decided on something and everything was renovated, that 25 would disappear because would everything be hit that
I
was on
think
that list?
most of the 25 would disappear because you would still have some ongoing capital needs because
Yeah,
not
but the
everything
things
has
that you're
to.
calling out as crucial.
Right.
would be gone.
But most of your equipment, major equipment has a 10 to 15-year life.
But
you know,
if
so-
it was a roof is included, we wouldn't probably put a new roof on.
For 20 years, yes,
For 10 years
that's
later. So you would, in a fine tune, you would subtract some of those costs.
right,
That's why I was just trying to get to the, what are we looking at here?
correct.
And I think sort of along those lines, when we were looking at corn, what to do with it. If I remember right, the demolition costs as bonded, was it roughly $1 million or something?
Yeah.
Roughly,
Right.
that bond was going to be, what we're paying per year was almost equal to what we were paying, just to have it sit there between insurance and everything else. Right?
Close. Yeah.
Or it would be getting worse, I think, if we didn't do it immediately, right? It's getting things were going up, so. Demolition cost. Roughly was the same thing, not doing anything to the building, but you have to pay them
Over time.
over time anyway, so that's almost a wash in terms of. Not doing that.
Right, here's the thing, like you said, Rusty said, your buildings get to be 15, 20, 25 at the most. Whatever money you have for preventive maintenance is not, you're past the point of no return. That money would be wasted. You're far better off looking at get reimbursement at some point, whether it's an ADA upgrade, code compliance, rental is new, because now you're chasing. So we have several buildings in the category. You're really, there's no point to over analyze it because you can't put that much money into the building to get what you want. It's not gonna happen.
The rest, did you want us to pick through the configurations that we thought were closest to what we were looking at.
Yes.
And then go through those,
We can do that, yes.
if any of the ones that current, the status quo, we went through the capital needs. Doing that one. I would like to look at, options 7 and then options 10 and 10A. If we wanted to get started, Bob, and go up, if we want to start at 10A.
So should we go through?
Yeah.
Okay. Enough, go to this. Yeah.
Then I know we have, did you guys get the questions and answers? Did they get that document? Okay. Let's go ahead.
So they answered in here,
It's
basically.
in, okay,
Yeah.
all right. Because I know Bob had a question on how it would fit for the interim. So
And we
that's-
added that option as option 11.
Yeah, awesome.
So option 10 is repurposing of Lyman and Brewster. And again, you know, what that actually means, we're gonna have to decide so that we can put an accurate number to it. And then taking Memorial and having pre-K through 5th grade in the grade 5 school and maintaining Strong and Cotton Job as they in their current configurations. The option, when you look at the budget side of things, what we did, and I'm going to just skip both Lyman and Brewster because, as I said earlier, the number we developed for it is really more based on, well, what if you wanted to keep the site but not have the building there and maintain it as a future site for the district. So that's what those numbers reflect. But at Strong in Cotton Jog, the basis of those budget numbers are primarily for ADA and code compliance. And the reason I put those numbers in there is because those are fully reimbursable by the state. So you get, approximately 50 cents on the dollar for any work that you're doing regarding that. That scope could be added to if there was a concern that we wanted to also address educational needs in there. Those are all things that we should discuss. And, if you want to take on something, those types of projects in addition to the code and ADA. And maybe what happens in there, because those buildings are better in terms of capital needs but we would also be able to say, let's add into that some of the immediate capital needs that need to be, part of these projects. So the majority of the bulk of the work ends up being at Memorial, which is now, in this particular case, we're saying it's a pre-K 5 additions and renovations. And when you look at the budget, so what we're showing here is just a schematic on, a pretty major addition to the building. And in the estimating part of it, we indicated that total project costs are in the range of it's 59.63 million. Estimating a reimbursement rate with a reimbursement rate of 26.8 and a net cost of about 32.79 in this particular case to do that. So that's just in terms of the grade configuration. The challenge with this project is going to be doing the work while the kids are there, because that's the biggest challenge in all these schools. If there's room to put an addition on, how you put that addition on and where the students go, it would be the other challenge in it. So it would be tougher because it's a major addition at that existing school. But it's one approach to renovating the building, and we've done multiple projects that are similar to it. what I know is that over time, and we used to do a lot more earlier on, over time, people are less tolerant of the impact on education. Parents don't want that impact of their kids during the school year. And so you have to take more precautions, and of course, you've got security issues that we worry about now and safety issues that are much more significant than what we used to do. But that's where we landed on with this particular option 10. That's the major project. The question then, if this was the one that was this option was selected, then what we would do. We've done a preliminary sort of phased construction schedule for the project. Obviously, Memorial will be the first project, and then anything that happens at Strong, Five and Chalk would come second. And one of the things that we would look at in a project such as that is to say, how can we maximize the students and enrollment in the other two schools, because they will be operational, to minimize disruption at Memorial. So there's ways of creating swing space. Maybe you revive some of the portables for a short period of time, knowing that it's a very limited period of time that you would be doing that for, to accommodate some of the students, thereby giving more space within Memorial and allowing the component activities to occur in a more expeditious way to get the project done. So,
Howie, do you have a question?
Yeah, this is Howard, Chair of the Building Committee. I think what you're talking about is great. Everybody can hear me, right?
Yep.
Great. I do think we should probably take a step back. I mean, we can talk at length on every one of the options and what it does, but I'd really like to see if we can focus on what type of criteria we want to use to evaluate these things. There's a ton of criteria. Every one of them has different weightings. Everybody has different weightings for each criteria. I'd really like to see if we can take a more global look at this and just try and figure out what's important, so we're evaluating these things on the same scale. And yeah, I don't know if anybody else wants to. Like I said, we can argue these individual options, for the next 30 hours. But I've created I know some people have concerns about travel distance, build quality is important, expansion potential. I'm just trying to get a feel for what the committee and the Board of Ed think are the important criteria that we need to consider in this.
So if you want, Howie, we can start brainstorming those and go into a few of them if we have time. Is that what you'd rather
Yeah,
say?
and I think the architect did a great job of putting a lot of those together, and it'd be great to narrow it down to 6 or 7 key criteria. And that way we're each evaluating every one of these options on their merits.
And then weigh those based on.
Yeah. And this way, if anybody has bias, we can kind of figure out where the biases lie, and everything that we're evaluating should be based on some criteria. I just wanted to get, brainstorm with everybody and just see if they had an idea.
Well, one criteria, how it could be cost.
Yep.
Be an overriding criteria for many of them.
Yep. Typically, in a lot of these exercises, because cost becomes the #1 criteria, they look at it at the end and do more of a benefit cost. Because the cheapest thing to do is obviously, maybe nothing. But if you look at, factoring in the cost at the end, if 2 projects are relatively close together and one's more expensive, it's fairly obvious. But if one's significantly cheaper but has, far less benefit, it gets a little bit more tricky. So I absolutely agree with cost. But I wouldn't let that be the first thing we look at, because it'll rule out most of the projects.
Well, I think one of the most important things is upgrading of the space that all the kids will be learning in. And not only the upgrade the spaces for learning, but also like as mentioned, the upgrade of mechanical equipment and the savings and the energy cost. It's really the long-term cost that's the most meaningful, I think, not the upfront cost. And then the value of the space that's created with these upgrades. You know, if you go back to the capital cost, and you just look at that money, you're putting $25 million into schools to maintain the status quo. You're not getting any upgrades with that. To me, that's not a cost-effective option. And I had one question regarding option 10. So the cost that's factored in for Memorial is based on a phased approach to renovating the school while the kids are in the school.
And that's what we would develop. So when we were looking at this, that would be the approach to, because 10A, I think, is one where we say build a new school in the fields and then demolish it. So that's, you know, a different approach to the same project in essence.
So that's going to extend the length of the project. It's
It
gonna
does.
add to cost of the project. And I know you mentioned that there's possibly some swing space in the other two buildings that we're keeping, but what about the two buildings that we're decommissioning? Why couldn't we utilize those for swing space
No, that's what I did say.
temporarily? Okay, that's what you're mentioning?
That's what I've said. You would maximize utilization of those buildings while the renovation is going on. But when I evaluated those two buildings, you won't be able to accommodate all the students in those two buildings. So you're gonna hopefully take out a grade, maybe more than the grade, but whatever you can take out and make work. And in that case, you know, you might have to look at, well, do we, you know, have art and cart for you know, a year or so and take some of those spaces and make them into classrooms on a temporary basis. In order to not have the kids sort of exposed to or in the middle of this large construction project.
So if we had 4 operational buildings, there's still not enough space to be able to shut down Memorial and basically do a full renovation with no children.
Well, I was looking at it more that, you know, trying to put the students between Lyman and Brewster, but potentially you could say, let's find space and at the high school and any of the other buildings as well. But that becomes a little bit more tricky in terms of which grades are you moving and how are you moving them. The more straightforward ones are the elementary schools themselves.
And that's what portables as well.
Potentially the portables as well.
I
mean,
just
that
love to
would be a
see if we could
decision. That would-
get into a position where we could just close the school and renovate it without having kids in.
That would be ideal.
Ideally.
Agreed.
Yeah, I had impact on operations as one of the criteria when evaluating options. So that's definitely, I think that's definitely important. I don't know if it's as important as everything else, but that's where you start to weight your criteria.
In the list that we had developed, that would have been fallen under disruption to education,
Yep.
operations and education.
Another one that obviously is kind of a hot button, but it'll be interesting to see how important it is overall is travel distance. I know that's definitely a concern on some of the options, as would be programming. You know, programming can be really large, and maybe you break it down into more, but those are 2 other criteria. In terms of importance, I don't know where they lie, but I know those are things that people are going to be concerned about. So, in the interest of transparency, I think it makes sense to factor those into the discussions.
So that would be when we talk about future ready schools, that's, talking about making the program appropriate for current education.
Okay, great.
And I just feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reimbursement criteria, when you renovate as new or you build a new school, the state criteria is that there's an expectation that all the state money that went into this is going to last for 20 years without a need for upgrade. So to me, that's also important to compare the other options going all the way down, to the base option and projecting that out 20 years. What's the value 20 years out?
And that's what we would typically do, because everybody will gravitate towards the least expensive option, which tends to be the capital
The short term
improvement.
is expensive.
Right, but when you factor it over the 20 years and say, this is what you would have to do, and the fact is that when you do it piecemeal, you're getting little or no reimbursement. The net cost over that 20-year window will be very telling.
And in that capital improvement, I mean, you're just repairing what needs to be repaired now. And you're not fixing everything. So there's gonna be more cost over that longer timeframe.
Yeah.
That's not really factored in yet.
Yes.
Because you've got every part of these buildings is aging. It's going to
You
lead
got
to higher
things
repair
like-
costs.
And
You
still
don't have-
running inefficient.
You don't have sprinklers in some of the buildings, so those, sprinkler systems out there.
I think, how it was in record, language criteria with programming, and I think that's probably the most critical in my mind is what's the educational advantage of each of these facilities? What does it provide to the student? What's it provide to the teacher? What's the experience that could occur because of a newer building or newer structure? You know, if there's too many kids in a class, and it's too small or it's too old, we provide the necessary tools for a modern education in these buildings. And some of it's space, some of it's outdoor space, some of it's, different kind of classroom with different kind of arrangements. And so I think to me, the programming issue is tied to the educational experience of the children. And including that it's a number of transitions, all the factors that are around, and maybe Doug might have an idea on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I think as a general statement, and I think you all know I was involved in one new construction and one major renovation expansion in my previous district. Those schools looked nothing like the other 20 schools in that district when they were complete. And it wasn't like the cost was exorbitant. It's simply because they used modern designs. They took into account the technology that we now have, and they were designed with that technology in mind. They took into account the way that education and like the world of work is now changing, where things are more collaborative and children are working more in teams now and have to be prepared to do that. And you end up just getting a more beneficial educational experience because you have the option of essentially designing with that in mind. Now, you still are limited by the square footage. So it's not like you can have classrooms that are double and triple the size. But and again, these guys could speak more to it. I can't exactly tell you how or why, but the designs are just, they're more modern, and it's not just limited to schools. It's like if you go into a new church or a new office building or anything like that's been built in the last 10 to 15 years, it has a different feel to it. And it also takes advantage of things like potentially, you mentioned the energy savings, but I've also seen like a lot more natural lighting, a lot of safety and security features, just a lot of things that with older buildings, you're kind of stuck with what you have. And so I do think that opportunity is there to improve the educational programming. And again, this is just my opinion. You guys don't have to agree with me, but like, I also think if we're going to go to our taxpayers and ask them to put a significant investment, they don't want the Taj Mahal and they don't want it like that we're overspending, but they want to know that it looks different than when they went to school or when their kids or grandkids went to school, where they're going to say, why do we bother spending this money to just basically have the same school with the narrow corridors and the old systems and all those things. So again, in what you've seen, is it kind of tracking with what I'm saying? Because I don't want everyone to take my word for it.
Definitely. I mean, what we see is more, to be more flexible with the spaces. Not every room has to be the same size. Some, you have breakout spaces, yes, so you design the building so it's actually more usable. The flexibility, cafeterias are used in multiple ways. Gymnasiums are used in multiple ways. So trying to, depending on the school, the grade levels that you're designing for, there's just a myriad of different options that are available to you, and you as a district, I mean, you will choose which ones are the best for you. And the reality is a new school makes it easier in the sense that you can literally, place things. The adjacencies are a lot easier to accomplish. And implementation of the systems are a lot easier in the sense that, again, energy savings, you're building and R values for your roofs and your walls, all those things that are now basic requirements of the energy code and the building code are easy to incorporate, whereas some of the existing buildings, you can get close to that, but you may not achieve it. And you have to do other things to still meet your energy criteria. So not that it can't be done with existing buildings, we do it all the time, but you have to evaluate, when it makes sense and when it doesn't.
But the
So,
newer
so
surveys-
I'm taking what everybody, I've essentially, I think I've got us down to 4 key categories. Physical plant, educational experience, construction impacts, and travel distance.
I'd like to say travel distance, to me, as a district, it's a low impact.
Yes. Oh, I absolutely agree, but we know that.
Personally, I see
criteria.
individual families wrestling with that, but when we had a choice between Lyman and Brewster for educational styles, Lyman's population had to be half Durham people. Who made that choice to travel to
You
longer
guys would know that
distance.
better than I would, but it seems like anecdotally, yeah.
So there were more Durham people traveling to Lyman than there were Lyman people going to Brewster. So my thought is, as a district, that's not that big a consideration because we were already waiving that in terms of how we're looking at education.
Yeah.
So,
I
at a personal
absolutely,
level,
I
one
absolutely
family might decide it's
agree.
too far, but I agree it's a consideration, but to me, I think as a district, when I see this is, I would not make that one a 4 necessarily.
No,
Even if
and
we're
when
putting travel
I
distance in
rated it
there,
as
how
well.
If we're putting that in there, I mean, what you do need, it would be good of us to look through buses. I mean, at that point, cost savings for buses on travel.
Yeah.
Timeframes, if it's a K-5 with the same time frame, they're getting to school at the same time. As opposed to 3 different routes.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you want to
It would be
loop that into
awesome.
cost effective.
Yeah, in my experience, anytime you consolidate, there's cost efficiencies to be gained. I mean, Kim would know more, but, and we'd have to run the actual numbers, but to your point, Lindsay, I mean, if they're all going to one site versus multiple sites, I would also say, we're not talking about a huge town in Middlefield or in Durham, or even the 2 towns combined, even if you compare to like other towns in Connecticut where that might be a bigger factor rather. And so I think it's a consideration, but I kind of agree. I don't think it's a driving factor in.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree. I agree completely. I just know that that's one of the touchstone topics. And, like I said, I just want to make sure it's considered for transparency purposes and assigned an appropriate weighting.
So that's something transportation that could be finessed in the sense that if we had long bus routes because there's a long distance, if it were, pleasure to the board and to the community, you split that into 2 bus routes and maybe you don't save a bus, but you shorten their time. So that shouldn't really be as important, in my opinion, as a factor.
So why don't we just call it transportation? A category of transportation.
So we should also keep in mind that a new or renovated as a new school, there's a lot of intangible benefits that are hard to measure. Doug, you mentioned one of them, natural light. The students walk into a new school building or renovated as a new building, I guarantee you none of them are going to say, wow, there's more sunlight in here. But there's going to be a benefit that's hard to measure there. You're going to have much better air quality in the schools. And again, none of the students are going to walk in, wow, the air is much cleaner today than it was recently. They're not going to notice that. But there's benefits to those new or renovated as new buildings. Again, the intangibles that are hard to measure, the benefits that you get from making that push to create a new environment.
This
Well said.
regionalization has been on the table now for a long time, and the 2 driving issues that I think have pushed it are obviously the education, improving the education for the students. And the second thing is the cost of operating the school district, especially because we had too many buildings and we had a declining enrollment. It was actually the declining enrollment that kind of was the catalyst. And then the cost of maintaining 5 buildings with a declining enrollment. And then also how consolidating the buildings and the students would also improve the education. Those were basically the two pieces that were pushing the board over the years, different board configurations to come forward with different ideas for the regionalization, the reconfiguration.
I think for the first time,
No, go ahead.
we're seeing, so if you look at option 10, say, for example, 72 million, 71 million, reimbursement rate, net cost is 41 million. Yeah, that looks like a lot, but then when you look at the estimated 10-year savings, that's almost $30 million. So then you're looking at rough numbers, $11 million to do the schools. But the problem and the message we need to get out to the taxpayers and the voters is we're going to need to bond at $71 million. We're not going to use that all, but we need at least 90% of it. And that's risky if you don't go 100%. We need to ask for that. And we don't use it, but we need to have that in place to get a project approved. That's the message. It's not going to cost 71 million.
Right.
But in order to move forward with the state needs to know if they approve this project and then their funding is pulled back, that you're committed to it and you have the ability to do it. Doesn't mean you have to. Still a local decision. If the state didn't have the money, you could still pull the project, but the state needs to have that safety net. The other point I just wanted to mention was with capital. So at the 25.8 million, that doesn't mean you're done with capital. That just means you're in a good spot again. So capital has been sort of pushed to the back burner for a while, and that's why we're here. So even with a new building, you want to start saving your 2% that you can save every year. Over 20 years, I'm not going to be sitting here, but some people are, and you're going to be having the same conversation how you're going to pay.
But you're
So-
also having a cost savings over that 10-year period of only having 3 buildings, which kind
And you
of
can funnel that
all funnels
into-
back in, so
Yes.
it makes total sense.
I think too, when we're talking about costs, I mean, if we want to do subsections under these criteria, we'd have to talk about the per pupil and what that does to the per pupil based on what configurations we choose, because some of these configurations aren't going to drastically change the per pupil, but some of them will.
That's a good point. And once we narrow them down to 3 or 4, I can give you very, very best estimate, but ideas what it takes millions of dollars to make the per
If
pupil
we were
down.
to take the students out of that school and put them in the 2 other schools, how long would it take for Memorial to be done? Roughly, it's a year, basically. Or 2.
Yeah. you
Well,
can-
if the school's empty,
Yeah,
you
it's
can
much
get the
quicker.
project done in, 18 months to 18 to 24 months. That's fine.
And with it
Kim, have you
occupied
looked at
in
the-
that phase, which would be,
The challenge is that you're also dealing with hazmat, and that's when you don't know, you can't abate a building. I mean, you can apply for variances, et cetera, but it's not advisable to abate a building while the students are in school. So you're limited to certain times windows that you have that ends up extending the time. And in general, I mean, even with that in mind, sometimes as you're working and you open up a wall, you might find hazmat in there. Now you've got to stop all operations and get that taken care of. So there's risks. Again, not that it hasn't been done, we've done plenty of those, but those are considerations. So you can say, renovating it might take 30 months instead of 24, it might be 30 months, maybe 36 months if everything goes, pretty smoothly. If the students aren't in there, it makes it a lot easier.
One of the other criteria that we talked about is the number of transitions, so the number of these options still have more schools involved than just the 3, so we probably ought to, in terms of weighing the options against it. For example, the cheapest option or the least costly option is 4, which has been the option that's been on the table for about 6 years now. And yeah, that still has 2 transition ones, and this other one has one transition, or one non-transition. It's in the lower grade. So, when I was looking at option 4 is the one that's been on the table, and it still ends up to being the least costly, but it may not meet some of these other criteria. So I think you need to look at number of transitions and number of school experiences as well.
So it's on, there's impact on operations. I mean, it can fall underneath there, but maybe impact on. I don't know how we want to word that. Transition. Discussing education, that's how.
It seems like that would also be educational experience.
Yeah, it would be under that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we've all had these conversations that the longer the learner, their parents, they can invest in a particular school, the more they become attached, and also it's not as difficult. Have to make as many, you're saying about as many transitions, you know, some kids can do that very easily, other kids, it's traumatic, it's hard. But also, you know, I've heard since I've been here, and it's not just unique to us, that, you know, it's harder to get parent volunteers and things like that. I think it's a lot harder to get parent volunteers if you're only going to be at a school for a few years versus if you're going to be there for more years, especially at the elementary, where, not that we have to do it this way, but where K-5 is kind of the normal or traditional. And, you know, that's 6 years where you can get a lot of parental
And the parents
involvement.
need to be involved with that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely don't want it.
One of the, when we were looking at this in the past, when we had students come in, talk about what they were experiencing, with their experiences, they like to be the boss of the school. They always like to be the older kid there, who knew their, how to get everything done, how to get stuff, you know, how to move through the school, how to, you know, challenge the younger kids and how to get them into the thing, but they're always like to be, you know, by the time you're in the 4th or 5th grade, and you have kindergarten kids coming in, you really can help with those programs. That was always an issue that came up when we talked to the kids.
So that option is actually going to school, shutting Memorial, contacting everybody in Lyman Brewster for the 1.5 2 years, whatever. So then you've got a K-5, a pre-K to 5 in 2 locations, and then you go to middle school and then high school, which Memorial will then replace when it's done. You still have that same setup. How short are we if squeezing K to 5 or pre-K to 5 in just the 2 schools? What does
There's
that
not
mean?
enough room.
Hmm?
I think that's what you would say.
That's how short are we in terms of pay? What does that mean?
By how much though?
2 portables, 5 portables.
There's a couple more of this. I don't want to give you an answer to that till I've really done that analysis. I know that we don't have enough. I think, you know, it's something that we would have to
I
evaluate.
think it have to be major looking at the side of the schools now, which unless
I
the
think-
one side underutilized at this point, but.
The evaluation would be one that, how can you repurpose spaces within the other 2 buildings to make it all work? Because the advantages to having that building vacant while you're renovating is going to be fairly great. So we would do that. And then what we'd also look at is in that scenario, let's say we're still 3-4 classrooms short. That's about one of the few times where then I would say, consider bringing in portables for 2
Yeah,
years.
so my question was, you
Yeah.
don't know exactly what we would need to do
Yeah,
that.
what we would need to do and how we would accomplish it. But if that's one of the options you pick, then we'll get into that level of detail with it to make sure it's gonna, you know, that's would be the objective to really take the kids out of it.
You answered this the last time was, did you put pre-K for everybody in these projections?
And how much?
Yes, no, we did one option where there was an expanded pre-K program.
So that was 2A.
That was 2A.
Yeah.
No, it's
But
pre-K for all.
yeah.
That was an expanded pre-K option.
Not pre-K for all, it was just we doubled the number of pre-K students. Because if you are thinking of pre-K for all, then we have to look at what that's.
But that would also be doable.
Same might be required in the future.
I mean,
In 20 years.
Pre-K for all is not happening in the next 2 years.
No, not,
So if we squeeze everybody into 2 and build totally renovated Memorial, we could allow for that easier.
that's what that was, is we allow.
But
Any
with-
option we look at should consider future expansion.
But if we look at the proposed interim configurations, putting 4 and 5 at Memorial, would that be enough space to accommodate renovations?
You mean,
Because you're no longer putting 3 through 5. You're putting 4 and 5,
So there's,
yes, there's space freed up.
right? So that space could be freed up to do the renovations during 4 and 5.
Ideally, I wanted to get at least 2 grades out of Memorial. And I think, because if you just simply look at the portables and say, we've got 6 portable classrooms, one of the grade levels is about 5 to 6 classrooms. Then you look at, okay, maybe there are some rooms that are being used for other, programs that you can consolidate and pick up 2 or 3 others. So you can conceivably get 2 grades out of the school. The challenge would be getting all 3 grades out of the schools.
There's one more criteria that I think would be a secondary criteria, and I think everyone would agree with it, but I think it still needs to be on the table. I guess based on my experience, it seems like if you're doing a new or renovate is new, which is in some of these options, I would hope one of the criteria would be for that project and for all the projects that the ability of the community to access the site and the school and utilize it during non-school times is at least as good, if not significantly better than what it currently is. And what I mean by that is I've seen a lot of projects where even the way the building is laid out, if it's new or renovated is new, it's designed so that the front part of the building can be easily used by community groups and things like that. I know we have people that play pickleball and things like that. And I just think that's important because I mean, all of our schools are used by various aspects of our community. And I think that's also a way to get people kind of behind these efforts to say, yeah, they are schools and that's their primary purpose. But can we also have a consideration that sometimes the schools are the best places for certain things to happen? I know we got the auditorium here, and that's probably the biggest one, and maybe the gym here and things like that. So maybe an elementary wouldn't be as much, but I still think there's an opportunity there, especially given that high school and the middle school are in Durham. And so I think that might be helpful to consider.
So like a public accessibility.
Yeah, I was actually taking it a step further, not just accessibility, but actually designed with, it goes back to what you said about flexible spaces. Multi-use spaces that, yeah, it's whatever during the day, but it easily converts with movable furniture and stuff. And again, my experience is once you do this, it becomes the most requested location. Everybody, we'd be meeting there, we'd be meeting here if we had something like that, because it would be designed for things like that. And again, not to compete with the existing spaces of like the towns, but in my experience, they're pretty limited too for any types of large gatherings.
So what happens is that's a good point, especially when you're looking at a facility and debating between new versus a renovated project. Because with renovations, you have certain limitations. Ideally, you want to have public and community zones and academic zones, because you still have to separate the two and have the security between the public zones and the academic zones. The goal is always to have, the community use spaces available to the community after hours, and design it in a way that there's limited or no access to the academic spaces that are purely academic in terms of classrooms and support spaces. A lot easier in a new building because you're designing it from the ground up, whereas a little more challenging on a renovation. But that's not to say again that you can't do general renovation, but that becomes one of the future ready criteria for the design of the building. So if you take a school that really is not suited for that configuration, that becomes a challenge and I guess a negative in terms of using that particular option.
Kim, did you run the debt service numbers on the $30 or $40 million?
So just a couple of points on the debt service. I had done that back at Aaron's presentation, and it's in there, but so we do have debt service falling off at the end of 24-25. So starting the 25-26 budget, we can bond $5 million roughly without increasing debt service at all. So that would isolate it from everything else in the budget, just the debt service line would remain level funded. This, I did example based on 40 million of bonding, just because that was a start, and a lot of these are around the 40-50 million that we would have to bond. And we would increase, we would peak in 28, 29, and then fall down again. But our savings, depending on which scenario, would be either cover that completely, be halfway through, or then we had done one with Memorial where we kind of went down and then we went back up, because we do have some expenditures of an increased school, which would be maybe you need another nurse, maybe you need, another custodian, things like that. So in the analysis that Aaron did, the savings would be a little less than if you didn't renovate a big school. But so we have bonding availability of about 5 million. That's not enough for these, but with that said, if you bond, so if it's ending costing 11 million after the savings, you're still going to have to bond the full amount, but then those savings offset the payment. So
Budget,
we have some
budget-wise.
budget wise.
Yeah,
So we have some flexibility there with that. Another question you had asked, Bob, was how do we address our current needs in a regular budget cycle? That's going to be impossible to catch up, because if you have 25 million and you can only save 2%, which is roughly $780,000 a year, we're never going to catch up. You need to do another bonding to get these schools.
Yeah, but I didn't know at the time they included that in their estimate of the total cost.
So originally, option 11 was put in, supposedly to reflect the interim proposed configurations, but I think if you guys look at it, Memorial is listed as 2 through 5, and that's supposed to be 4 and 5. So we would have to have a analysis on 4 to 5 being there.
Maybe it's just a typo.
So I don't know, but that would just shows what the interim would look like.
Yeah.
We could do option 10 while we renovate with 4 to 5 in Memorial. We have extra space with 1 grade level missing from Memorial.
So you have it here. You just have this here.
So what grade would it teach out of Memorial? Third. So at Memorial, third graders, we had, so it'd be
So it goes to 67 from the full number.
So
Okay.
3 classrooms, maybe?
We did.
Yeah, Memorial is 4 and 5.
Okay, so
That's just a typo here.
Okay, that's perfect. I thought so based on the numbers there, but I wasn't quite sure.
So at some point, when we're done discussing, are we gonna go through each of these and kind of compare them to the criteria we talked about to see how they fit in, so that we can hopefully narrow it down? Because right now we're kind of talking in generalities, but at some point we have to focus in, maybe not right at this moment, but we have to focus in and pull out probably 3.
Sometimes it
Three
helps if
options.
you eliminate options rather than try to pick the options. If you eliminate them and say these will not
Yep.
work, then you've got a shorter list and.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
At some point, we have to go in here and start reading through.
How are you still there? I lost Howie.
Howard.
Just because he has the criteria going through, so I wanted to see. There he is. You there?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure if you just heard what Lucy said, but and Rusty and Carson said possibly, do we want to go through and eliminate choices, we don't even want to.
Oh, yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. It'll allow us to evaluate a smaller number of options against our criteria.
Okay.
And then if we have to circle back, we always can.
So before we do that, we want to narrow down to 5, because it seems from what I have, cost, transportation, programming, impact on operations, and lots of improvement on educational experience. Operations. No, it's not operations, but no, that might have been the transition, but we're going to move that into the people cost disruption of education. Is that read it again?
Yeah.
Cost, transportation, programming, impact on operations. And then we did have disruption of education. I didn't know if we wanted that under impact on.
We changed programming to educational experience. So
Okay.
physical plan, educational experience, construction impact, transportation, cost, and then public benefit.
Okay, so disruption of education is. So Howie, we're down to 6. Correct? You have 5. So I have cost, transportation, educational experience, construction impact, public benefit,
And physical plan,
physical plan.
yeah.
Physical
Plan. And we want to go through and weigh each one of these based on weight from 1 to 6. And where we think that they are.
I think too, that we look at some of these, like the options where you have an 8-12 at the high school. I don't think that's one that we would consider at this point. 7-12 is different, but an 8-12, I know did not hold it well.
I agree with Lucy, but I also say 7 through 12 is not 7 or 8 are not options for the high school.
Say that again.
7 or 8, in my opinion, are not options for the high school.
7.
Leaving the high school is 9 through 12.
9-12.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe we can just.
That actually affects all.
So 6 would go, 7 would go. 6A would go, no, I'm sorry, 6A would go. 8 would go. 9 would go.
We want to talk about keeping, I think there's no question, we want to keep 10 or 10. And I think we'll probably lean more towards the renovators need. Do we want to consider also putting on the table the, I was looking at the first one, what we have now. This is what we have now, this is what it means.
Well, I think for a comparison, I think it's important to have, even though we don't believe it to be ideal.
Right.
But I think it's a good thing to have.
So the existing is 1 and then 10A. So now we have 2, now we have to get a third.
And when we truly look at, wanting to be all K through 5, I think that it puts out puts out option 1, in my mind, option 2A. And the 2 pre-K5s, option 3.
The only thing is, I was thinking, we wouldn't have on the table just closing Lyman and whatever great configurations and the comparison with closing Lyman and Brewster. We don't have to do that. We could just put out closing Lyman and Brewster. In case someone says, why are you closing Brewster? How about we just close Lyman? I don't know.
That's
just put it out for
true.
discussion.
It would be a good comparison to be like, well, look at the additional savings for closing the 2 versus just 1.
Well, was the option before is what we had on the table for the last 3 years and 4 years.
Right,
And
So
so
option 4.
you could keep that as a kind of a base,
okay.
and then where Booster is closed as well.
My thought would be to have option 11 on there as opposed to option 4, because it puts us possibly where we're gonna be as opposed to where we are now.
That's all the schools are open.
11 reflects the possible proposed configuration.
But do we have 2.5 at line?
Hold up, no,
No, it's
that
not.
one should have,
That's a typo. That's 4.5.
Oh, this is 4.5.
Yeah.
I was gonna say-
no, Memorial,
11.
Memorial's 4.5 and Lyman's 2.3.
Right.
Lyman's also messed up on 11, just so you know,
Okay,
it says
I was
2.5.
gonna say we're still splitting the grades.
It's two.
So how is
That,
it?
that number online, where did you get, that doesn't make it. Hold on, let me- I can't remember.
Where's kindergarten?
Which.
Okay.
For option 11,
Yeah.
He's talking about this number.
That's probably more. Like easy. It's like
That's what I thought too.
340 square foot technically.
When we look at it,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Anyway,
Would the board be interested in, so we talked about 10 and 10A as being possible, but having an expanded pre-K, so like maybe a 10B that included the expanded pre-K in that option, because this doesn't include it in there, like pre-K for all. Is that, that's another thing to do, but is that something? No. I mean, you're talking about planning for universal pre-K, it'd be the time to do it.
It's the space. But also at the same time, we can't, if we bond for too much money, based off space. Then our reimbursement goes down.
Correct, and then also you have the space standards, but then also if you're building for an expanded pre-K. Your other rooms, your other spaces are gonna have to be smaller to stay within that square footage, correct? First, unless there's some sort of waiver or something for building for future pre-K.
Well, that is a factor.
Design of the building.
if you're just doing upgrades and space standards are larger, your rate's gonna go down.
Yeah.
As opposed to reno as new, design spaces based on space standard, you have a higher opportunity to get the most reimbursement. So you kind of want to think about that. Rusty kind of said that at the beginning. But that's important to consider.
I mean, if we build a building and then we have universal pre-K before the building's even fully constructed, then what do we do?
The challenge you have is if it's not a requirement and you're building, you have to build based on
The
your
current
building
requirements.
projections.
Yeah.
So then it impacts your reimbursement rate because you're overbuilding.
That's why I didn't know if there was a waiver, we can ask him.
You could, and that we've done that many times successfully. We have to make a compelling case that we're planning for the future. But that's not a guarantee.
But if the state comes through and decides to do universal pre-K, that's gonna impact every school in the state, and not all the schools are gonna have the room for it, so the state's gonna have to do something to help the schools, the districts or whatever.
No, they're not. We see unfunded mandates that don't count.
They might give you a year or two to implement.
Yeah. Well, we'll certainly have an outcry, hopefully, maybe that might be.
Well, and
I
I'm
don't
not,
know.
I'm not trying
Yeah,
to
well,
bias this one way or the other, but we talked a lot about renovated new versus the new school with option 10. Based on what we said before, and a more flexible design, wouldn't a new school give you the opportunity to plan for the space for pre-K, but to use it in different ways if that mandate didn't come through immediately and still justify it, or is pre-K space so specialized that it would have to be either kindergarten or pre-K or something like that?
It's pretty specialized.
Okay.
Depending on.
So we'd have to commit to it
Right.
in either scenario. Okay.
And even the drop-off area and how it impacts your site plan.
Oh, right.
All those.
Playgrounds,
Playground, all of it.
enclosed playgrounds for pre-K and all that stuff. Yeah.
And I know at one point it was an unpopular discussion, but with looking at our space at Coggins-Shog, Linda brought up a good point that pre-K could be housed at Coggins-Shog, correct? With that space.
It could, but it wouldn't be free. We would have to, make some adjustments to make it suitable for her, but that is an option. We could put that.
Yeah, and I think that would go back to the whole educational experience piece. I think we could make it happen and make it a very good program. I think generally transition to kindergarten is easier if you're going to the same school where you did pre-K, and then just all the stuff about all the little kid stuff that would be built into an elementary school. But yeah, we could do it. For
You know,
sure.
there are benefits to it. You've got one of the high school kids able to work with pre-Ks, they're right there.
Oh, yeah.
I like it. So that, I don't know what other districts have done with pre-K in that realm, but it would be something that I'd like to look at, just because we do have that access space.
I have several high schools that have pre-K. Yeah, Meriden has them as well.
Mhm.
At both high schools.
Rusty, I have a question. What are your thoughts on having classrooms that are built where the walls, I don't know what they call it, when you can open up classrooms? You can have those
Partitions.
partitions. Yeah,
It's, you know, it depends. In some cases where the teams work together, it's great. It does take away wall space from the room, so that becomes challenging and, you know, teachers are very territorial. So the reality is, when you open up the space, you really need to have an ability to make the space work together. It gives you flexibility, because if you have a larger class size, or if you want to do an activity that requires, so it's done quite often, you know, and you just have to be judicious. What we've done in the schools lately, the new schools are doing, it's not all over the place, but maybe,
Right.
you know, one per
In
grade
certain
level,
areas,
where
right.
we incorporated a partition, something like that.
I mean, I had the opportunity to sub a school for a marking period where they had that ability. And we opened it, and team talk for the whole marking period was phenomenal. You know, the kids
The
loved it.
acoustics of those walls have improved significantly.
It was.
Because that used to be a big issue, because, you know, everybody said, I can hear everything that's going on. You can improve the acoustics, making sure it's mechanically operated, so that you don't have to, and everybody's struggling to close and open these partitions. So those are the types of things you have to look at.
I was just thinking that adds some flexibility without having to actually build spaces that are larger, and you can create them in certain areas.
Yep.
And that eliminates additional construction. You just open up the wall and partition, and then
Linda, did you have anything to add on that? I know your hand's still up.
Oh, is it? Good for me. No, I was just going to, Rusty mentioned that the acoustics have improved. I was just going to chime in and say I've had experiences with those partitions, the movable doors, and it was just really hard to teach if the person who shared the wall with you didn't have good classroom management. It was a miserable year of loudness in your class.
Correct.
Yeah, from
I
a
have a
facility
different
standpoint,
experience.
I don't like them for a lot of reasons, not acoustics, maintenance. The HVAC systems generally get disrupted. If you're gonna do it, as long as the larger room is a hard built room and it just separates in the middle, that's probably okay, but generally not really good at the facility side of things. Just my opinion.
I would think if we're gonna include 11, Lindsay, we ought to include one with closing booster and then one with closing with dram alignment. So that we have,
Give a full comparison.
11 has
Yeah.
no closures. No continuing operation.
Well, it looks like that's what I have a question on, because it looks like, I don't know if those are like capital improvements on 11, because the numbers seem really high. So that looks like renovation at Lyman, Brewster Memorial and Strong, which isn't the interim, obviously.
No, but it's the no closures.
Right. Yeah, no closures with renovations,
Yeah,
not just the capital.
not just the short term, that's a long term number in here.
Yeah.
This is a long term number leaving that 222 thing in place.
Yeah.
Number 4 is closing one school, and I think number 7
7.
is the other one, we're closing 2 schools and then 10.
And
So that
7, the
would
only
be-
difference between 7 is the pre-K 4 instead of the pre-K 5.
Okay.
So you
But
would,
there's a different cost there.
right, so you'd want to keep 7.
But
And
do we have to add to the strong? So, you know, add another grade
Yeah.
level.
Yep.
So you gotta spend strong as well.
yeah, and that's in the cost analysis on that one.
But it just, I mean, it's gonna go out to the public, it
Just
just
for
says,
comparison, yeah.
you know, here's. Keep everything as it is. Here's closing 1 school, here's closing 2 schools, and here's. What the board has looked at as more optional as they have in their option 10. And then we can do the criteria on each one of those and say what's good about each one. And then probably get it down to 2. And the costs are pretty much comparable. It may not be the driving number, it's the cost, and use some of the other factors.
So on the balance of discussion, we gotta figure out what they have to.
So at that point, we remove existing option 1 and option 2.
Yeah,
We're taking off existing.
11, 4, 7, and
Why are we taking off existing?
Because we have existing under option 11. Where you,
yeah. Option 11 is
4, 7, 10, 11.
Rusty, can I ask a question about 7?
Sure.
With grade 5 moving to the middle school and them needing an addition and thinking about the interruption and whatever, if that was the option, would the first project almost have to be the middle school to make the extra space for those 5th graders? And then that would alleviate some of the issues at Memorial, because you'd have a whole grade level out. And if that's the case, does that make it a viable option or not?
No.
That's where my brain was going. but-
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
5 is another year.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I'm all about saving money on the Memorial project, but it seems to me that now we're kind of funding 2 major projects and I would think Memorial would want to do first, but that doesn't work for the other, if I'm processing that correctly, but
You are.
I'm not saying take it out. I just want to put it out there.
it'll probably fall out because of that.
Well,
To Bob's point, he's putting it out there so that people, very valid. To Bob's point, he's giving everybody in the community an option. And the way you just analyze that, hopefully others would analyze it as well. Because it is a larger disruption. It is gonna make it more. Hopefully people will see that. I'm not gonna put words in anybody's mouth. That's just the way.
And I think the board needs to discuss or commit to or not to, if you're gonna do the projects and you have a school like Coggins, say under the option 7, that doesn't change, but there's code and ABA. Do you commit to doing that within the large project, or do you do that another time? Depending on,
Well, yeah.
so,
Well, whatever's more cost effective.
Well, how long does that take?
Right.
Is most of that done in the summer?
Right.
Or over 2 summers to achieve them?
so it's just really a financial question.
Right, well. I mean, if you look at the cost, if you take out the capital improvements of Strong and Hagenstraw. Then those numbers drop by what, 20 million. Because that's what you can put that into the total cost. And then if you wanted to separate them out. When the debt service drops off, maybe you go out 10 years without an improvement, keep that 20 million out and then put 20 million in 10 years from now when their debt service will drop off. That's more of a financing question than a cost question, but I think.
But I think it's a sort of a consensus question that everybody thinks that way and not just let's get them all, state of the art code at once.
Yeah, I think that's the number that we have to sit down and look at is. If you go with option 10 and don't do any and only have ADA and. Code upgrades at Coggins and Strong. Can you put those off? for 10 years. After the debt service drops off and the budget is, and go out for a bond again, or about 5 years or something like that. But. And how much can you get through the operating budget? You can only get 700,000, that's $12 million there. That's, you're not gonna get that done. I think you can look at it in terms of the financing, but you know, your option is to say, get it all done at once.
I mean, it would, these
I agree.
projects would still be phased, because you can't do everything at one time,
Yeah,
but
You can't
if you
physically
phase
do it
one
all.
year, you know, each project would happen, maybe there'll be a couple concurrent if they're small enough. But
but if we bonded it all at once, we'd have to spend it in,
we'd have
committed
to
in 2
anticipate
years.
escalation and a schedule, but
so you'd have to. You have to reissue.
So you do bond anticipation notes until you actually, do you pay interest
Yeah.
on it?
You get a referendum for the authorization and then go back and issue debt when you need it then.
But we're also getting critiqued quite a bit too, that we're also getting critiqued quite a bit for not doing any ADA in any building. either.
Yeah, right.
So. We're damned if we do and damned if we don't,
Right.
let's just do it.
So 5 million for the CRHS Library renovations. What's the time frame then?
so
Codes
Yeah.
and ADA.
code and ADA, so it might be something that's done over 2 summers. You know,
No disruption.
So then there's zero disruption.
and that would be the ideal condition, and depending on the details of what we end up doing there.
So it's almost like a capital improvement project.
It is, but it's reimbursed.
Reimbursable, right?
Like our roads.
Like our.
And those projects are not June 30th grant application driven, they can be applied for at any time. So every month you can decide to go.
7,
State pay for
10 a.m.
athletic fields still.
You have one more.
Does the state pay for the athletics fields in the reimbursement?
If it's part of, if it's a new field in terms of for a program, yes.
But if we
I'll
put
go-
a new playground in at Memorial, that would be part of the cost,
Right, so the
part of the reimbursement.
reimbursement, yes,
If you're building a school on existing athletic facilities, you have to relocate. That would be
Yeah.
reimbursed.
then it's.
And I know we're trying to narrow this down and not add one more, but I would like to add option 10B, which would take pre-K and put it at the high school. So it would just take pre-K out of the K-5 renovation. Just so we have an analysis on that.
The kind of with a bunch of options.
Depends.
Huh?
And we do want to keep 10A, which would show the new building. Okay. It's a hard thing for all of us to swallow. That's a brand new building.
That's probably worth comparison.
But you gotta.
Yeah.
And that would change the student movement. For renovations, right, Memorial. Could they get bills without, I think, yeah, they wouldn't be able, wouldn't have to shuffle it, but around back there.
We wouldn't be shuffling. As we said with the 4 to 5, we wouldn't have to shuffle from Memorial.
For the renovation, we want to get them if we could, right? The short term.
If we did a new building at Memorial, would we keep the existing one in operation and build a new one behind it or next to it?
That would be the goal, yes.
So that would reduce disruption.
Even when you're building a new building, you're taking up the athletic field and there'll be construction traffic. It's not a direct impact on education, but it does affect playground and athletic fields. So
Operations.
it's minimal.
Yeah, so that's box 12, right? You could put the middle school at Memorial, make strong the elementary, so you can get your field. back.
That works.
Bring all this stuff into just those options and.
And then weighted based on the criteria that Howie has.
Yeah, I think you just go through each of those criteria and say it does it doesn't do it, this is where
How bad?
You know,
And that we can add that into the analysis when that goes up, that goes to the public too.
Yeah.
That'll help that, you know, it was our criteria that we came up with and how it was weighted
you know,
based on each configuration.
So do you want me to post these costs for tomorrow? I think we should on the website and then
Yeah, we can do that
we'll filter it down when we get the next.
when we get the next one in. Okay.
Rusty, in terms of your process, what number did you have in mind for the number of options? Because I know it takes you a lot of time to do a deep dive into
So
each
we
one.
talked about 2 to 3. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that because it's like we're more being bannered about. who did that.
That's got one, we're up to 15 now.
I mean, part of that was your time, but part of it wasn't it also that
15.
asking the community to engage on more than a handful of options? It's
Yeah.
just, it gets, people get very confused and then they.
But I mean, to Bob's point, option 4 is closure of one school, 7 is the closure of.
Right, that has, yeah, that has.
I mean, do we really need option 7 if 10 is a repurpose of the two?
Yeah, I mean, you can get rid of 7 instead of 10.
Right, we did say that 7 was gonna be something we thought would fall off.
Basically, 7, same.
Right, and I mean, when they're doing an analysis 4, so it's really just 4 and then all of the 10s along with 11.
Maybe you could add pre-K at the high school is just a tag on box to. Option, you know, instead of a whole other option.
So, so what do you guys think on that for 10A if we just added an extra section if pre-K was to go to Coggins? An extra box. As opposed to doing a whole configuration.
Yeah, we can look at that. So right now we have 4, 10, 10A, which is gonna include expanded 3K.
Yep.
And then 11, so we're down to.
I still have 5 for some reason on there. Did we not want to look at? Yeah, 5, those 5 represents,
No. I'm a no.
Option 5,
represents 2 pre-K 4s, 5 to 8. So that's an expansion at Strong, along with 2 separate elementary schools.
And that goes back to Doug's point.
With only 1 school closure.
Yeah, I'm a big no because
Yeah, no.
then it goes back to everything that this board's been arguing about since 2016. Who's going to what school, crossing traffic, all of the above.
Agreed.
Right, so we're gonna remove option 5.
the only thing with not offering that is that you had one community that wasn't happy about not having a elementary school in their community, and if we bring it all into one, is the other community going to have an opposition? When we just, I'm thinking about when we come down to the vote for the regionalization, is that gonna be an issue? When you look at the numbers, how many Durham students are coming to Lyman as a choice?
So,
Kind of think it wouldn't matter.
exactly.
Yeah.
I don't-
think it wouldn't matter.
Overall, I really don't think.
If that is a concern based on my experience, and again, I'm not trying to push you one way or the other, but. A new school, usually everybody wants their kid at a brand new school.
Yeah.
In my experience, that's just,
I just
it,
put it out.
it's kind of. I don't know, that's been my experience, but especially if you haven't built one in a long time, and again, now. That might be a heavier lift to get the community to support a new school if they perceive that that's, not cost effective, but I think that's what these guys are gonna help us
And
maybe determine.
the other big thing with option 5 is it's more money than just. Doing a huge add-on to the memorial, and you're still keeping 4 schools.
And I think the side too, when you look at the
Yeah.
history of these configurations going all the way back to 2013 and before that, I think the original study here is 2014. That was done by DRA. We have all this history on option 5. I mean, it's already, we don't have the numbers on it, but if we're not considering it, but we need it for an analysis on what it looked like, we have 2 or 3 studies that can show that.
If the majority wanted an elementary school in each town, then it's my opinion that the kids in those towns should go to school, shouldn't be busing kids all over the place back and forth and making a preference. I don't,
Right.
when there were different programs, there was a benefit and there was a choice. Now that those programs are consolidated, I don't know why we would do that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it's not gonna be during my middle field, it's gonna be where the population falls at the space and then taking slow. The center line's gonna be.
I think that would be the way you have to do it because the schools are already there.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that would
So
also
it's
be
not-
the board, that would be the board's decision and there might be reasons to separate it on the town lines, but it
Necessarily go.
would also be very difficult to do the programming, I think. Because one school would be very small compared to the other, just based on the way the population.
The schools would have to be of equal quality, the buildings.
Yeah, I
Exactly.
mean, isn't it roughly 1/3?
And it's gonna be difficult to
2/3?
keep.
Yeah.
So you'd be creating one school that would, it would just be.
There
different.
would be a middle aged community, like if you live in Durham, that's I mean, depending on where you live in Durham. You might go here. and
I
you're
think that
background
would
here.
be the decision, but that might also complicate things.
A few years
because-
ago, we did that analysis and there was a section of Durham that
Yeah.
we need to go, so.
Yeah.
And that's hard because you'd still probably have people closer to Brewster going to Lyman too,
And you could spend
just
years
because of number wise.
deciding where to draw those lines.
Right, and we're also not taking into account the fact that we've eliminated school choice.
We
So
just want to
we've
break up this
eliminated
whole
kindergarten
process,
school choice.
just put all the kids in K through 5 and let's move on here. Just cite it on the town lines. This room is done, right?
Yeah, well, how do you have the old landfill?
Okay, so we'll go back it again, option 4. Option 10, option 10A with the pre-K at Cog added on, and option 11. Is that what everyone comes forward?
Yeah, about 2 to 4.
That way you can really show the difference in savings.
Does that work for you guys? That's 4.
I failed him.
Well,
Well, it's 4, but it's
two of them.
like 3.5.
Yeah,
It certainly isn't 2.
it's 3 with an addendum. 3 with an addendum.
I mean, we're skirting around this. 3 schools.
Yeah, as much as I hate to do it, I don't think we can go much less than that at this point.
Sorry, Wendy.
What does that do to your timeline to get information back to us and then the overall timeline in this process?
In 10 and 10A is a renovation versus a new.
Right.
So new is a little simpler to evaluate in the sense that you're not getting into the details of the existing building. Well, we'd be doing that anyway, so. And then. We'll do it.
Well, thanks for that short answer. I appreciate that.
I mean, cut it down from quite a few down to 4, so that's okay.
It's excellent progress.
I'm surprised. But for this group, it's pretty good considering you like to talk and you like to see the options.
Yeah, that means we should 7 off. wouldn't it?
I know. See?
I mean, I just want to reiterate again that we have a lot of talent in this room, aside from Board of Ed members here that are experts in this field. I'm not looking to blow up your heads anymore. And you guys, because you guys
I got a sign.
that you guys have been very influential and informative, so you hold a lot of value in in your questions, so I appreciate that, and that's why I'm leaning towards where I'm leaning, because I see the same thing you see when it comes to that, so I hope everyone else does too. You know, we're not looking to disrupt anybody. It is gonna be a disruption for a couple of years, but at the end of the day, I think we're doing what's best for all these kids and putting them all in the same schools. Give them a better school, a newer school, and it gives us money in the future, in my opinion, to start working on Strong and to start working on Cog and Shog and our athletic fields, because now we've consolidated and gotten rid of 2 buildings. That's just my opinion. And I say that with, with a lot of, feelings of that. I'm not looking to disrupt kids. You're not looking to disrupt families. Educational. I don't have kids that are in those systems now, so I'm not going to speak for them, but all I'm saying is that I think it's important that we do that because for the future of this board, because financially we're struggling as well too. So I think it's all things that need to be And I think ultimately adds up to better education and everything gets done that
I think so. I hope everyone else does too, but if not,
programming can be.
we're here to listen, so.
And we have some pretty talented architects.
We do. I think there's a lot of talent in this room,
Capital
so.
projects, if we keep all these buildings open. The capital projects are already 25, almost 26.
And you still have an old structure.
Just to keep them all
Right.
open, and that's doing nothing for the education,
Exactly.
program. That's just building. So. That's a lot of money.
And I'm sure Eric does want to keep working on it. so.
Okay.
I didn't forget about you either.
That, and we're Eric's time. the
Right.
Band-Aid
I mean, he's
is
been band-aiding
day after
things.
Day instead of,
And, we shouldn't be banning the things. We're two towns that doesn't get a whole lot of federal funding, but we've got to be more fiscally responsible. And I think this is going in that right direction. That's just my personal opinion. And I say that just because I think it's the right thing. I'm not saying it for any other reason.
Howie, are you still there? I'm waiting for him to talk.
What lines on a highway somewhere.
Because I know we talked about the weight of this criteria, so if we were gonna weight this criteria, I'd want to do it tonight. Or if we just feel like they're gonna be categories that we want to include on the presentations.
And that's what I would do is
Okay.
put and have this, so we would address each option and give our opinion about how it works with education, what's the disruption and so on.
Yeah,
Perfect.
you've done that pretty much anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
wrap it up.
Okay, so we'll do that. Anything else within configurations, anything, and anyone online? Lucy is here, Moore is online. Amanda, you guys have any questions, feel free to chime in.
I don't have any questions, Amanda. I am in agreement with the option that you guys chose to look into a little bit further. Those were some of the ones that were on my.
And then her list, would have been the last thing she said.
I don't think we talked about, the buildings be repurposed, demolished. I don't know if that's something you
Oh, we
wanted to
did want
discuss
those.
tonight.
Okay. So do you
If
want
we're
to
gonna
go?
carry a number for that, we need to know what exactly we're doing.
I think you need to carry the demo fee. I don't know how else you do it.
Separate it out.
Well, unless you had a strong feeling you wanted to hibernate a particular building. Put that cost in it.
Well, as I said, I think what I remember is hibernating costs is pretty much the same.
But we need to look into
Demolition
the,
costs.
Yeah.
So that cost is the same.
we need
What
to
about
look
the
into
sale analysis on buildings?
That's just best case scenario.
We also need to look into the legal requirements at Brewster, whether or not it can be demolished.
Yeah,
So
Right,
there's-
so that's something we can do in the process of while they're doing this.
there were deep restrictions on that originally.
And
Just
so
just a note on a sale. If there's municipal bonding money, which I know there is on Brewster, that restricts the use of it for educational purposes only. On any area that was touched by the bonding, money. So you can't sell it to Carvel or Dairy Center, it has to be educational purpose. I guess Lyman did not, that's why it was okay to sell. to-
But you would be essentially if it's something like a preschool or something like that, like say Golden Days wanted to buy a place or.
If it had an educational component, most likely. Daycare, I'd have to find out about, but
Even like an ACES or something like that.
yeah, well, there's something like an ACE before, yeah.
Interesting. But there are no school grants still where you're haven't finished the bond.
We've long run those out since we've been
Good.
talking about this.
Because if you
Yeah.
had, then you'd be penalized for that.
Correct.
So,
We do have a solar lease on Lyman that we would have to, either if a new owner would have to take ownership of the solar lease, or we'd have to buy that. That's not, I don't want to say it's not a lot of money, but it's not when we're talking about, in relation to this.
So best option is if they were sold and go and went with that.
Correct. It's a 25-year lease that was signed in 2010. It's there for a while.
Just a clarification on option 10A, the extended pre-K, would all of pre-K be at the high school?
So are you saying all pre-K existing or universal pre-K?
And then we need to establish how many.
Well, we'd have to plan to where it would be, so I would say, yeah, I would say.
I mean,
universal
I think we
pre-K,
have room here for universal pre-K.
Right. I would,
That-
I would do a universal analysis.
Yeah, that would be a pretty major stake in the ground, because once you take any of this space and make it into that, it's gonna be almost unusable for anything else.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that would just have to be, that's what we're gonna do.
And I think it is gonna be a costly number.
Oh, yeah, no, but
But it's
the other
good to
thing
see.
is in circulation and how do the kids get there, all those. things
Right.
need to
Oh,
be
yeah.
Considered. But the number of pre-K classrooms, we're not just talking about doubling from going from 2 to 4. Are we talking about going? Is there a number that we're targeting?
How many kindergarten classes?
Yeah.
For everybody.
For the
It's
equivalent-
essentially gonna be as many kindergarten classes. It doesn't mean everyone's gonna take advantage, but we still have to provide it. It's like the bus.
So universal pre-K, wouldn't be full days to start, a pre-K 3 is a half day as it is, 4 days a week. I mean, there's ways to, you're not looking at the same equipment as, universal kindergarten. It's not, it's not.
It's like,
It's not exact number of rooms and spaces and things like that.
but it would have to accommodate the whole
You would have high
population.
school, right? I mean, you'd be talking about renovation of a whole portion of the high school that would, I think, be cost prohibitive.
Is that a number that we could work on and get
No,
to you?
Yeah,
Just so we don't have to hold up this, like, Jen has all the, and then you would know
Then we'd have
for pre-K spaces, like what's the maximum number of kids and all those things. Bathrooms and.
And whether it's all day or part day or.
Right,
some.
'cause we don't know that. We could start it part day and then want it to be full day, or the state could mandate it to be full day.
It's a slight chance that it's mandated, then would be some information by the state to fund it.
Right, and then even her point about, is it just 4-year-old or is it 3 and 4-year-old?
yeah, it's,
Like, universal is a term that gets thrown out there, but different places operationalize that in different ways.
Janet, as things come through or rumbles come through or reports, it'd be great, if we could see the stuff that's coming in on pre-K. I know I hear it from the legislation level, but that would probably be.
I mean, you just look by our kindergarten meetings, right? Whereas having kindergarten classes.
We have 94.
You wouldn't need more than 6. I would say 4 classrooms for universal pre-K would work. Because you'd be doing half days.
That's right.
Is that
Is that
possible here? Is that possible here right now?
They've started universal, just saying.
Well, that's what they're gonna spend time figuring out. They'll look at the whole footprint here and.
Because then ours, you just can't take a classroom and say this is pre-K, it's a lot more that goes with it.
I think. Other
But
than
option
stuff.
10 is pre-K, is not at the high school, and then on 10A is pre-K is at the high school.
Now, looking at the topics that Kim had to go through and what we have, I think they've got some solid information to work with. And you can move on if, unless anyone has anything added or in their notes that they want to throw out there. When wants it. Twice. Oh, okay.
Thank you. I want to thank Rusty and Carson. They really put in a lot of time on this and I've been throwing them late last minute curveballs. Made Rusty almost get a speeding ticket out of it.
We really appreciate it. The analysis on these have been amazing for us to see and how much information you've given us on top of that has been really helpful. We will move on. Doug, you moving?
Yes, is that okay?
Yeah, I'll just wait for you to move. I'm gonna walk. Okay.
Just so I can look at anybody.
Okay. Thank you guys for coming. We appreciate it. We'll be in touch. Number 4, public comment. We'll do in-person public comment first. Public comment limited to 3 minutes per speaker. If anyone has public comment, that's in person. If you could just state your name, what town you're from.
Hi, yeah, Samantha Eidinger, Middlefield, Connecticut. Just a few thoughts and concerns from two members of the board. As I said, Samantha Eidinger, I'm a Middlefield resident and parent of two children, ages 4 and 7, one of whom just started his second year at John Lyman Elementary. I want to begin my statement by saying I appreciate your effort made throughout this arduous process to bring our two towns together to one cohesive experience for our children and for our communities. Once again, I see the goal of the changes you want to implement, and I'm encouraged by the vision. However, as most of you know, I'm an advocate for maintaining our local elementary school, John Lyman. And I also want to express my profound concern regarding the proposed means of getting to reconfigure the school, specifically the interim plans, which from my understanding, address none of the necessary updates. Once again, there are too many pieces missing from the how. I respect the challenges inherent in decision-making, but it is imperative that we, together as residents of this district, address the implications of this decision. I don't need to tell you the importance of the role of stability plays in our children's lives. These students deserve a stable educational environment that not only cultivates their joy of learning, but also provides the unwavering support they require to flourish. It's disheartening to see a decision that appears to disregard that fundamental needs. We all witnessed firsthand our children face unprecedented challenges through the upheaval caused by the pandemic. The importance of stability and consistency in their lives cannot be overstated now more than ever. Members of the board, I heard call numbers of the changes not ideal in a prior meeting. And I would like to respond to that sentiment by saying, I believe stability is not a luxury, it is a necessity. A stable environment provides a sense of security and predictability, helping children feel safe and supported as they hone their emotional regulation skills. Consistent routines benefit not only their learning, but their mental and physical health. Many studies over the past few years have indicated that frequent school moves were associated with lower academic achievement, behavioral problems, and even an increased risk for obesity and associated health concerns. I can send any of that research. I'm in grad school right now. I can send it all over to you. From an educational perspective, consistency also allows students to fully dedicate their cognitive energy to learning and creating instead of adjusting and adapting to changing environments and routines. For families with more than one child, this will make daily transportation exponentially more complicated. For children with special needs or IEPs, this repeated disruption will bring undue stress to the child, the family, and the faculty who are already working pretty hard. In the August 9th Board of Ed meeting, building meeting, I believe it was, Superintendent Shook described the reconfiguration as having not an adverse impact, this is the interim on the budget, which I'm assuming does not necessarily imply gain. And as was later addressed, moving kids every 2 years will also impact family engagement, volunteering, and belonging, missing that this is my school feeling. And as a brief aside, I attended a K-6 elementary school in a town not much larger than this, the same school, the same 20 classmates, and the same supportive adults that I very much needed at the time were all there. I'm 38 years old now, and I still hold a sizable place in my heart for that school. You don't need to imagine, you know the impact that this has on a child's development in the very best of circumstances. Never mind children who have experienced any difficulties or disruptions in their lives, which I think is fair to say is not uncommon. One of the first questions asked after August 9th presentation, which was what path forward is the most cost effective? I understand the importance of focusing on reimbursements, and minimizing net costs, but I was heartened to hear a response along the lines of, sometimes the right thing costs more. And that is the heart of it. When it comes to these schools, not buildings, these children are your most important stakeholders. They're the ones by whom we need to do right. So I ask, given that these students are still recovering from the disruption of the pandemic and will be for some time, given the current increase in construction costs and the still unattended end-of-life equipment at Lyman, I don't understand them. Truly, I don't. I realize these objections are a pain at your side, but as residents and parents, it's our duty and our responsibility to contribute and to advocate. So I ask that you reconsider with the priority of stability and consistency for our children. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else in person?
Right.
Hi there, I'm Mike Tchaikovsky from Durham. And I hope something of this magnitude is the first step in a very long process. And I hope more of an effort is made in the future to inform the public. Because I just recently found out about this plan a couple of weeks ago. And I think something that is this disruptive, this expensive, really needs more community input and more community outreach. You know, moving a kid from a school and having construction is incredibly disruptive. Ask any teacher, ask any student. They're not getting the same experience moving from classes, having people on carts, you know, having people constantly move them and change their busing. And there's also kind of the other truth. I've lived in Durham for 11 years, and there's two things I can count on. One is Durham fair traffic, and then the other is someone trying to take Lyman and close it. And Lyman hasn't been able to be closed because it is a great school. The voters have rejected it constantly because it is one of the best things in this community. I mean, put it up against any elementary school in the state. And I can speak seeing my son's growth in the school. It is a fantastic place. And I really think it's regrettable that we're trying to ruin the community that Lyman has made. We're trying to take away the place and the school that it has built up. And I really hope that we can take a look and just kind of hope that we can look at other options and really keep what we have that's so great. You know, I know a great building is awesome. Natural light is all very good. You know, all sorts of great facilities are great, but really the truth is, and I've been an educator for 19 years, a teacher for 19 years. And the biggest thing is to make a connection with the kids and to make it work where you are. And Lyman has that, and I really don't want to see that taken away. But most importantly, I really hope this isn't pushed through without more of a community outreach. And people really need to know, because again, I could take the people lined up in front of Lyman to pick up their kids, you know, today. And I doubt many of them know what's being pushed through and how quickly this is being pushed through. So I hope we can take a step back, put the community more on notice, reach out, Parent Square, something like that, and just work to inform everybody about how long this could take, how expensive this could be, and really, if we could possibly keep what we have. I've seen 10 beautiful options today. I really would propose option 0, is that we keep what we have and we make it work, because we really have a wonderful community and a wonderful school in Lyman. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Mark Simmons. I'm a Durham resident. I have 2 children in the district. First, I was going to say thank you to Mr. Mallett, Mr. Collier, but all their hard work. I can definitely tell they put a lot of thought and care with their many years of experience in putting together the study. I think it's important in these situations to lean on those professionals, lean on that experience that we don't all have, and you know, listen to them and their professionalism. I think a lot of great work was done tonight on taking that large amount of information, those 14 options, narrowing it down into something a little bit more digestible, into I think the 3 or 4 options that we ended up with. But I appreciate the board's work on that. Personally, I think number 10A, I forget which variant of building a new memorial school, getting the town together in one K5 is a great option. I didn't hear a lot of talk about the construction of a brand new building. Was kind of mentioned a little bit, but I think that offers a good option of not disrupting what we currently have. As far as the options discussed, I heard option 11, which was new to me tonight, as far as in the presentation, as the proposed interim plan. I don't believe it should be included in the discussions as it hasn't been approved. There's been not a lot of community involvement about it for the reasons that the speakers before me have verbalized. I would suggest to the board to include our current configuration as a comparison to these other options that we have. I think it gives a clearer picture into what we currently have and what we're going to be looking at. In addition to the new building, something that wasn't mentioned, having a brand new building could make Durham a destination. When you have parents that are looking at maybe two similar towns, and Durham has, brand new, modern, beautiful elementary school, could make that decision for them to move here. I know that's always a concern of getting more people in town. I look forward to the further work of the board of getting the budgetary numbers together, looking forward, a 5, a 10, a 20-year cost, and kind of taking that full picture and being able to analyze that. In closing, in regards to the number 11 interim plan, if that is going to be an option, I would like to see the board apply the same care and thought that Mr. Malik and Mr. Collier applied to their options, including budget impact, exploring all the variable options, impact on both the students and the town. And lastly, most importantly, presenting those to the town, getting everybody involved. This has been a long and crazy process over many years, but I think that's going to be the most important process. And my last part is I would like to encourage the board to put any vote on changing the current grade configuration on hold, and also revisit their decision that was made to end school choice until we have a better understanding as a town of what an interim plan may look like and a long-term plan.
Thank you. Any more in-person public comment? Okay, I will open it up to online. If you could raise your hand. There are 7 attendees, but I'm not sure. Everybody speaking. So I'll recognize Jennifer Simmons. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thanks. Hi, my name is Jen Simmons. I'm a resident of Durham and a parent to a kindergartner and a 4th grader at John Lyman. I'm also a certified school counselor and a licensed professional counselor with a practice here in Durham. I want to address the concerns I have about the proposed interim grade reconfiguration plan for the 2014-15 school year. I am concerned about both the timeline of how this plan was developed and the lack of public input on this plan before the board members prepare to vote on the matter. I'm concerned that during the August 19th meeting, a board member stated we could have voted on this last week. While I recognize the board's authority to make this decision per the amended regionalization plan, there is a distinct difference between can and should. It is deeply concerning that the board would consider voting on such an important matter with so little time spent investigating the pros and cons, as well as allowing for the public to weigh in. In speaking to fellow parents during my son's kindergarten orientation, many were unaware of this plan. This is not okay. Had the board taken the time to evaluate the plan with more thoughtfulness, they would have quickly found ample research on the subject, highlighting why this plan would not be in the best interest of our learners or our community. I will summarize some key takeaways from that research for you here. Schools with fewer grade levels create more transitions, which can negatively impact student academic, social, emotional outcomes. Research associates transitions with decreased academic achievement, an increase in negative student behaviors, and fewer positive teacher-student relationships. Significant achievement loss is associated with each transition year. Transition between schools compounds whatever developmental changes a student is experiencing. Studies suggest that gaps in educational outcomes result from the fact that students making the transition to a new school must simultaneously cope with developmental change and school change. And because coping with multiple changes is more challenging than coping with only one, these students are more likely to experience negative academic outcomes than those who only have to cope with developmental changes. Particularly middle childhood, ages 7 through 11, experience a number of psychological and physical changes that pose challenges, making additional transitions more difficult and stressful. Transitions disrupt student and parent positive social connections with teachers and staff. Children receiving special education services are more negatively impacted by multiple school transitions. Schools with frequent student turnover see adverse affect on school identity and the school's sense of community. When part of a longer continuous stay at a single school with the same administration, families may be more comfortable with grade-to-grade transitions and be better able to anticipate the particulars of the following grade as compared to a transition to an entirely new school. Educators can come to know students better and plan to proactively meet with students' needs. particularly with early interventions and monitoring from kindergarten through second grade. Close communication between educators at different grade levels is more likely when teams teach in proximity, and individual teachers are better able to consult with colleagues at the grade level.
Jennifer, we're at 3 minutes. If you could wrap it up.
Great. A few questions for the board. You state, at the August 9th meeting, the question was brought up that we have a choice to make between students being together or transitions. And I'd like to ask, does the board believe that it is impossible for school districts to provide an equitable education to students in multiple schools servicing the same grade level, as seen by some of our neighboring districts, as well as our DRG districts, such as Wallingford, Brantford, East Haddam, Madison, Region 6, Region 12, Region 18, all of which have multiple schools, elementary schools, servicing the same grade level?
Thank you.
Are you able to answer questions now or no?
We do not respond to public comment during meetings.
Great. In wrapping up, I'd like to ask that the board pause any vote on this matter until more community input can be heard and more thorough research can be conducted. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Recognize Emma. Go ahead. Emma, can you hear us?
Are you able to hear me? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you. I just wanted to thank the board for the hard work that you do. This decision is not going to make everyone happy. Either way, you're going to hear obviously many different sides, as there are many different perspectives to consider. But I just wanted to thank you for all of your hard work on this matter. I talked a lot last, I think 2 meetings ago.
Emma, you're breaking up.
Emma, you there? We can come back to Emma. Recognize Jill. Jill, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. If you want
Hi,
to
good.
name and your town.
Sure. My name is Jill Soboleski. I'm from Durham, and I'm an RSD13 alumni and have 2 daughters that are currently at John Lyman. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank the board because I understand that this is a very difficult situation that you're all in. But I did want to take a moment to express my sincere opposition to the proposal for the temporary reconfiguration for the district. It was stated at the earlier board meeting that the proposal is budget neutral, but it will create, in my opinion, severe disruption for our elementary age learners and their teachers and staff. So if the proposal plan is budget neutral and will only create disruption, what's the benefit to?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jill.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. Excellent.
That's okay. I strongly believe that leaving the configuration the way it is currently until we can get to the final goal is a much better option for all of our learners. Forcing our elementary age students to move schools every 2 years is both academically and socially destructive. I cannot imagine that anyone, whether you're a parent of a current or future learner, a teacher or staff member of Regional School District 13, a member of our community, or a Board of Ed member, that anyone see this proposed plan as a plan that would benefit our learners or educators. It is our obligation to set our children up for success, and this proposed plan does not do that. It creates more social emotional obstacles than our learners face every day and takes away any academic consistency which every student needs for success. Our students deserve this consistency, and what you are proposing is not offering them what they need to be successful. The learners of Regional School District 13 deserve better than this proposal. I ask that you listen to the community and keep our configuration as is and focus on our end goal so that all learners of RSD 13 will be set up for success. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick Viola, your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the transition issue. I think for years, most people have experienced the same thing that I've experienced with my kids. The majority of the kids went from K to 2 at Brewster, 3 to 4 at Corn, 5 to 6 at Memorial, 7 to 8 at Strong, and 9 to 12 at the high school. I haven't had any issues with my kids or their ability to participate in the real world in college or whatever. So that's real life. It's not studies, it's real life information.
Thank you. Okay. There is no, I don't
I
see.
try to go back to Emma.
It looks like she got disconnected. How about she goes back?
Do list Emma's last name.
I'm a quick. And they're from Durham. So, Emma, if you're listening, we'll be happy to take any information that you send. If you want to email it to us for public comment. With that, I think that I could take, motion to adjourn. Second by Bob. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah.